At the very heart of the world's largest democracy, there's been this incredible, decades-long power struggle. And it all boils down to one question. Who really has the final say? The people we elect or the Constitution they swear to protect? We're going to dive right into this amazing story. Right. This is the big question. Think of it like a game where one team thinks they can change the rules whenever they want. But the referee steps in and says, hold on, some core rules can never, ever be changed. That's pretty much the conflict we're exploring today. And we're not talking about just any rule book. The Indian Constitution is the supreme law. It's the blueprint for the entire country, laying out how the government works, but also, crucially, putting limits on that power to protect the rights of every single citizen. Okay, so to really get what's going on here, first we need to meet the main players in this high-stakes game. So you've got the legislative branch, that's the parliament. They make the laws. Then there's the executive, that's the government. They put the laws into action. And then you have the judiciary, the court system. Their job is to be the umpire, making sure the other two are playing by the constitutional rules. And right here, this is the heart of the problem. You see, the Constitution gives Parliament the power to amend it, to keep it relevant, but it also gives the judiciary the power of judicial review, which means it gets to check those amendments. So what happens when Parliament's desire to change the rules clashes head-on with the judiciary's duty to protect them? This whole battle didn't just start in a stuffy courtroom or a law library. Nope. It began out in the fields of a newly independent India with a very, very real problem. Okay, picture this. It's just after 1947, and India is dealing with crushing poverty. A huge part of the problem was this old system called the zamindari system, where just a handful of rich landlords owned most of the land, while millions of farmers had next to nothing. The new government knew this had to change, and fast. So Prime Minister Nehru's government started passing laws to break up these huge estates and give the land back to the people. But the zamindars, who were incredibly powerful, fought back. They went straight to the Supreme Court, arguing that these new laws were illegal because they violated their fundamental right to own property, a right written right into the Constitution. The stage was set for a massive showdown. And what happened next was just this relentless, 2-decade-long constitutional tug-of-war. Seriously, for every single move Parliament made, the Supreme Court seemed to have a countermove ready to go. It was this crazy back and forth. In 51, Parliament amends the Constitution to protect its land reforms. The court says, okay, fine, in the Sankori Prasad case. So Parliament's feeling good. But then, bam! In 1967, the Supreme Court completely flips its position in the Golok North case, saying fundamental rights can't be touched. This was a huge deal. So a few years later, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's powerful government hits back with another amendment basically saying, oh yeah, we can amend anything we want. Now, Parliament's first move was really clever. They created this thing called the Ninth Schedule. Just think of it like a legal lockbox. Any law they put inside this box couldn't be challenged in court. It was a perfect way to get around the judges, or so they hoped. But by 1967, the whole mood had changed. The Supreme Court was feeling more confident, and in that Golok Nath case, it drew a line in the sand. The court basically said, look, fundamental rights are the soul of the Constitution. They're sacred. And Parliament, your power is not absolute. The game had just changed. Big time. This constant push and pull, it just couldn't last forever. The country needed a final answer. And that led to what is probably the single most important constitutional case in India's entire history. To settle this epic fight once and for all, the Supreme Court put together its largest bench ever, 13 judges. 13 judges sat down to hear one case that would define the limits of power in India for generations. And this was it. The case of Kesavananda Bharati versus the state of Kerala. It's a name you should know. It all started as a dispute over a religious group's property, but it ended up deciding the fate of Indian democracy itself. The solution the court came up with was, frankly, brilliant. In a super close 7-6 decision, they invented a brand new idea, the Basic Structure Doctrine. It was this masterful compromise. The court said, yes, Parliament, you can amend the Constitution. You can even change fundamental rights. But, and this is a huge but, there's an unwritten red line. You cannot destroy its core identity, its basic structure. Things like democracy, the rule of law, secularism, the real soul of the document. But wait, the story's not over. This new doctrine was about to face one last, major challenge that would cement its place in history forever. Just a few years later, during a really controversial time in India called the Emergency, Parliament passed the 42nd Amendment. This was a direct shot at the doctrine. It flat out said that Parliament's power was absolute, and no court could ever question it. This was their final, all-in power play. But the Supreme Court did not back down. In the 1980 Minerva Mills case, it struck down parts of that amendment. And then, in this perfectly ironic twist, it declared that judicial review itself, the very power Parliament tried to eliminate, was part of the Constitution's basic structure and could never be taken away. The doctrine had survived. So let's just quickly sum up how much this changed everything. Before this doctrine, you could argue Parliament's power was unlimited, and the Constitution was pretty vulnerable. But after, Parliament's power, while still huge, now had a clear boundary. The Constitution got this powerful new shield, and the judiciary's role was cemented as the ultimate guardian of that shield. And this is why this whole story matters so much. The Basic Structure Doctrine is like the ultimate constitutional safety net. It makes sure that no matter how powerful a government gets, it can't just use its majority to amend democracy out of existence. It protects the very soul of the country. Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. India's Supreme Court figured out what that unshakable core was for them. But it's a question every single democracy has to ask itself. What are the foundational principles so important, so essential, that they should be placed completely beyond the reach of everyday politics? Definitely something to think about.